I signed a marriage contract that had one rule: never fall in love. By month 12, he broke every rule first. The ink felt cold under my fingers as I signed my name. I told myself this was survival, not surrender. I didn't know yet that this marriage wasn't meant to last. Hi, my beautiful family. Welcome back to Storyverse Vault. Your home, your safe place, your family. Before we begin, pause with me for just a moment. Heavenly Father, we come to you with open hearts. Cover every woman here with strength that never breaks, dignity no storm can steal, and peace that runs deeper than pain. Heal their bodies, quiet their minds, and light their hearts even on days they feel unseen. These women carry families on their backs. They love endlessly. They endure silently. They give even when they're empty. Today, you reward them with protection, wrap them in joy, restore what life tried to drain. Let no woman here feel forgotten, small, or finished. Raise them as pillars of grace, love, and quiet power. Amen. My beautiful family, this isn't just a channel to me. Every story you hear, I tell it with my whole heart. For you. When you stay till the end, when you like, when you comment, it tells me this family is breathing, growing, and strong. It takes 1 second, but it means everything. If this prayer touched you, tap the like button. If you believe in real love, real stories, and real family, subscribe and come home to Storyverse Vault. Now, let's unlock today's story. She was not born into desperation, but desperation found her anyway. Bills stacked on the kitchen counter like accusations. As a hospital bracelet circled her mother's wrist as machines hummed through sleepless nights. A man she trusted once had left her with apologies that meant nothing and debts that meant everything. When the billionaire's lawyer called, it sounded like an escape. Not love, not rescue, a transaction. 12 months of marriage for a payout big enough to erase fear. She told herself pride could be rebuilt later. She believed silence was cheaper than loss. He arrived in her life without warmth or apology. The billionaire did not smile when they met. He evaluated her the way investors evaluate risk. His voice was calm, precise, and distant. The contract spelled out everything he would not give. No love, no private expectations, public appearances only, absolute confidentiality. The payout waited at the end, like a finish line. He was not offering a future. He was purchasing control. She nodded because fear does not negotiate. The wedding looked like a dream designed for strangers. Crystal chandeliers burned above a room full of cameras and applause. She wore white, but nothing felt clean. There were no vows spoken from the heart. There was no kiss to seal anything real. He leaned in only once. "Remember," he whispered, "this is business." The crowd cheered for a love that didn't exist. She smiled because she was already owned by the image. That night taught her the rules without words. The mansion had many bedrooms. None of them were shared. A staff member led her down a quiet hallway like a guest who overstayed. Her room was beautiful and empty. No personal items, no photographs. Cameras blinked softly from corners she tried not to stare at. She lay awake listening to a house that did not welcome her. This was not a home. It was a controlled environment. By morning, the structure revealed itself. Her schedule appeared on a tablet before breakfast. What to wear, where to stand, when to smile. Staff reported details with polite efficiency. Publicly, he held her hand just long enough for cameras. Privately, he passed her like furniture. She spoke less each day because no one listened. In silence, she learned to observe. The phone call happened by accident. She stood at the top of the staircase when his voice drifted upward. There was no tenderness in his tone. "She's perfect for the image," he said. "Clean, quiet, replaceable." Words settled into her chest like ice. This marriage was leverage, a step toward power. She was not a wife, she was proof. That night, something hardened inside her. I stopped hoping he would soften. I stopped wishing for kindness. I realized survival required distance. If I was disposable, then attachment was dangerous. Fear became focus. Silence became strategy. I told myself 12 months was a number I could outlast. I began to plan without letting it show. From the outside, the marriage looked flawless. From the inside, it was a chessboard. He moved with confidence, unaware he was being studied. She learned the mansion's rhythms and his habits. She memorized what cameras missed. Every rule he enforced revealed a weakness. Every cold gesture taught her patience. The war had begun quietly, and he had no idea. The mansion taught her its language before it offered comfort. Doors closed softly but locked with finality. Cameras never slept, but they also never followed everywhere. He moved through his home with the confidence of ownership, not awareness. She watched from the edges, learning which hallways echoed and which swallowed sound. Staff avoided eye contact when he was near. When he left, they breathed again. Power lived here like oxygen, invisible but necessary. She understood then that survival would depend on precision. At breakfast, he read financial news while she sat across from him, untouched. He never asked what she wanted to eat. Meals arrived based on a profile she never filled out. When she spoke once about her mother's health, he did not look up. Silence settled between them like policy. Third-person distance defined their marriage more than any contract clause. She learned that acknowledgement had to be earned or staged. In public, it would come easily. In private, it was rationed. Her first public appearance as his wife unfolded like choreography. Cameras lined the entrance of a charity gala. He placed his hand at the small of her back, exactly where the photographers could see it. She smiled on instinct, not joy. Reporters asked about love. He answered with practiced phrases. She nodded in rhythm. The illusion worked flawlessly. Applause drowned out the truth. That night, he removed his wedding ring before entering his study. She noticed because she was watching everything now. The ring rested beside documents marked with board seals. Power did not sleep in this house. It waited. She passed the study door quietly, memorizing habits. This was not cruelty. It was calculation. And calculations always left traces. Weeks passed, measured by events and absences. He traveled constantly. She stayed, learning the mansion's blind spots. I began counting time differently, not days, moments. Moments when I could breathe without being watched. Moments when I could think. The contract didn't forbid intelligence, so I used it. The phone call returned to her thoughts late one night. Replaceable. The word refused to fade. She replayed his tone, not the sentence. This marriage was temporary by design. His ambition required a spotless image. A wife without history or demands. When the need ended, so would she. Understanding that truth stripped fear of its power. The lawyer visited unexpectedly one afternoon. Papers were adjusted. Signatures confirmed. Nothing changed on the surface. But she listened as legal language danced around permanence, time limits, exit clauses, silence agreements reinforced. She asked no questions. Questions were a signal. She wasn't ready to be seen yet. That evening, he noticed her for the first time. Not as an accessory, as a presence. He paused when she entered the room. The look was brief but real. Something in her stillness unsettled him. She had stopped trying to please. Power recognized resistance even when silent. The balance shifted by a fraction. I realized then that fear had changed sides. Not fully, not yet, but enough to matter. He controlled the rules. I controlled myself. And that was something no contract could take. The war would not be loud, it would be patient, and it had already begun to move. The truth revealed itself on an ordinary afternoon. She was returning from the West Wing when his voice carried through the open study door. He wasn't alone. Two men stood with him, suits sharp, expressions tense. She slowed without thinking, instinct sharpening her focus. This was not a private call. This was strategy, and she was never meant to hear it. The board vote is next quarter, one man said. The image has to stay clean. Her husband answered calmly. A stable marriage neutralizes the opposition. Another voice followed. Your wife? Yes, he replied without hesitation. She's temporary. She serves the purpose. The words landed with surgical precision. This wasn't cruelty. It was design. They spoke about numbers, influence, and optics, political donors, inheritance clauses tied to public morality. A wife made him untouchable. A divorce later would be controlled. No scandal, no mess, just a replacement narrative. She pressed her palm to the wall to steady herself. Every promise she imagined had never existed. She was infrastructure. When they left the room, she remained frozen, Her reflection stared back at her from the polished glass. For a moment, anger tried to surface. It failed. What replaced it was clarity. Victims react. Observers calculate. And she was done reacting. From that moment, survival became strategy, not hope. That night, he returned late. She was seated in the living room, reading, posture relaxed. He paused when he saw her. "You should be asleep," he said. She looked up calmly. "I couldn't." No accusation, no softness, just presence. He nodded once and walked past her. Neither of them knew it yet, but the dynamic had shifted again. Days passed without confrontation. She attended events flawlessly. She smiled when expected, but internally she cataloged everything. Meeting schedules, legal deadlines, the way his jaw tightened when investors pushed back, the way silence followed his name in certain rooms. Power had cracks. It always did. She just needed time to map them. I stopped asking myself why he didn't love me. That question belonged to a weaker version of me. Instead, I asked what he feared. Men like him didn't fear exposure. They feared loss of control. And control depended on precision, on silence, on predictability. I was no longer predictable. The shift reached him before it reached me. He began watching her more closely, not with suspicion, with curiosity. She spoke less, but when she did, it mattered. She moved through the mansion without hesitation. Confidence unsettled him because it wasn't purchased. For the first time, she wasn't performing. She was existing. The contract remained locked in her drawer, but its power no longer felt absolute. She had discovered something more valuable than leverage. Awareness. I wasn't married to a man. I was embedded inside an empire, and empires collapse quietly before they fall publicly. All I had to do was wait. The first crack appeared in public. A reporter pushed too hard at a tech summit. The question was sharp and personal. He stiffened beside her, jaw tightening. Before she could answer, he stepped forward. "My wife doesn't owe anyone explanations," he said firmly. The room went quiet. She looked at him, surprised despite herself. Protection was not part of the agreement. And the incident traveled through media channels quickly. Commentators praised his devotion. Investors smiled again. At home, nothing was discussed, but something had shifted. He no longer dismissed her presence outright. He acknowledged her with brief nods. It was subtle, but subtle changes mattered in controlled environments. Illness came without warning. She woke with a fever that refused to settle. The staff hesitated before notifying him. When he entered her room, his expression was unreadable. "You should have said something," he stated. His voice lacked its usual edge. An hour later, soup appeared by her bedside. He did not stay, but he also did not delegate. I told myself it meant nothing. Kindness did not rewrite contracts. Concern did not equal care. But my body remembered the moment anyway. No cameras. No witnesses. Just a man choosing to act when he didn't have to. That unsettled me more than cruelty ever had. Recovery brought proximity. He worked from home for several days. Late nights in the study turned into early mornings in the kitchen. Words were exchanged without agenda. Short comments, dry observations, unnecessary updates. Nothing intimate, nothing scripted. For the first time, they occupied the same space without pretense. One evening, she woke to movement. He stood near the foot of the bed, unaware she was awake. His face held no calculation, only fatigue, only something unguarded. He stayed for a moment too long. Then he turned and left silently. She lay still, heart steady but alert. Lines were blurring without permission. I began to question my own footing. Strategy demanded distance. An emotion threatened clarity. I reminded myself why I was here, who I was to him, what he had called me. Temporary, replaceable. If he was softening, it was either weakness or another layer of control. I could not afford to guess wrong. The answer arrived hidden in paper. She was reorganizing a drawer when the contract slipped free. This time she read without fear, without hope. Buried deep was a clause framed in sterile language. Emotional engagement by the principal party constituted breach. Breach transferred leverage. Her breath slowed as understanding formed. Control had conditions, and he was crossing them. Month 8 changed everything. He reached for her hand absent-mindedly during a drive. There were no cameras, no audience. His grip tightened slightly before he realized. He did not pull away immediately. Neither did she. In that silence, the balance tipped. He thought it was closeness. I knew it was leverage. After that night, nothing was spoken aloud, but everything was acknowledged. He no longer treated her like background architecture. He asked questions that didn't serve an image. Where she grew up, what she avoided remembering. She answered carefully, offering truths that revealed nothing dangerous. Trust was not given. It was tested. And both of them knew it. The story he told her came unexpectedly, not during a confrontation, not during a planned conversation. It surfaced late one night over untouched drinks. He spoke about a childhood built on expectations and punishments, about affection used as leverage, about betrayal disguised as loyalty. He never framed himself as a victim, only as someone who learned early that control was safer than trust. She listened without interrupting. I felt the ground shift beneath me, not because I believed him, but because I understood him. Understanding is dangerous when survival depends on distance. Empathy blurs edges, and edges were the only thing protecting me. I reminded myself that confession did not erase intent. Pain did not cancel damage. I stayed still and let him speak. From then on, he lingered longer. He delayed flights. He dismissed meetings that once ruled his life. The board noticed. So did his advisors. But no one questioned him openly. Power tolerated deviation as long as results held. She became the deviation no one could name. Presence replaced performance, and that unsettled the structure he depended on. She began documenting quietly, not out of malice, out of necessity. Messages sent too late at night, conversations that drifted into personal territory, moments of jealousy disguised as concern. None of it dramatic, all of it cumulative. Leverage was built brick by brick, and she recorded everyone. He noticed the distance she maintained. "You don't trust me," he said one evening. It wasn't an accusation, it was an observation. She met his gaze evenly. "You didn't marry me to be trusted." The truth landed without cruelty. He didn't argue. Silence stretched between them, heavier than conflict. I hated how steady my voice sounded. Strength didn't mean victory, it meant endurance. I felt something dangerous growing beneath my control. Not love, conflict. The kind that weakens resolve. I had to remind myself why I started this war, and what it would cost to lose focus now. The ex-wife arrived without warning. She appeared at a fundraiser, elegant and deliberate. Her smile carried familiarity and warning. He stiffened when he saw her. The room shifted around their shared history. Introductions were unnecessary. The ex-wife's gaze lingered on the narrator with intent. Recognition sparked instantly. This was not a coincidence. Their conversation was brief but devastating. "He never keeps them," the woman said quietly. "Only the image." She spoke of women erased politely, careers stalled, reputations dissolved, silence enforced through contracts and influence. "This is the part where you disappear," she finished. I thanked her calmly and knew the clock had started ticking. The warning did not frighten her. It clarified everything. The ex-wife's calm certainty removed the last illusion. This was a pattern, not a mistake. Marriage was a tool. Disappearance was the outcome. She returned home that night without looking at him. The house felt smaller than it ever had. Time was no longer something she had. It was something she was spending. He sensed the change immediately. "What happened?" he asked. Not sharply, not kindly, carefully. She deflected with practiced ease. "Just tired." He watched her longer than usual. Control recognized withdrawal as a threat. He didn't push. That restraint told her more than anger would have. I stopped debating morality. This was no longer about fairness. It was about timing. The board vote loomed closer every day. 12 months approached their end. He needed me visible, composed, loyal, and I needed him careless. Carelessness followed comfort, and comfort required proximity. So I stayed close. The final weeks were quiet on the surface. Public appearances increased, smiles sharpened, hands held longer than necessary. The press labeled them unbreakable. At home, he spoke of future plans that did not include her. She listened without reacting. Silence was not weakness now. It was containment. He crossed the line fully one night, not physically, emotionally. "I don't know what I'd do without you," he said. The admission came without armor. The words activated every clause she had memorized. She responded with stillness, not reassurance. The contract had shifted. Leverage transferred quietly, and he didn't even notice. I documented everything after that. Not obsessively, methodically, voice messages, private acknowledgments. Moments he forgot the rules he wrote. Emotion had compromised him. Power hates vulnerability, and I was holding proof of both. The board meeting was announced publicly, a final confirmation of success. He stood taller that morning, confident, certain. He believed the marriage had done its job. He believed I would exit quietly afterward. I watched him button his cufflinks and said nothing. This was not the moment. Timing was everything. The event unfolded flawlessly at first. Press lined the entrance. Investors applauded. She stood beside him as expected. When her name was announced, she stepped forward. He smiled, assuming compliance. That was when she reached for the microphone. The room stilled instantly. Power doesn't recognize danger until it speaks. I did not raise my voice. I did not dramatize. I told the truth plainly. About the contract, about control disguised as partnership, about silence purchased with money. Gasps rippled through the room. He stared at me, stunned. I placed the microphone down and walked away. The war ended where it was meant to hurt most. The silence after her exit was heavier than applause. Investors shifted in their seats. Cameras followed her retreat like predators. He did not chase her. Power never reacts immediately. It calculates damage first. She stepped into the waiting car without looking back. Her hands were steady. Her pulse was not. News broke before the car reached the gate. Headlines moved faster than truth. Speculation bloomed instantly. A contract wife, a staged marriage, emotional manipulation. The narrative fractured in real time. She watched her reflection in the tinted glass. This was exposure. There was no undoing it. He tried to call once. She let it ring. Then again. And again. The calls were not rage-filled. They were controlled, measured, urgent. That frightened her more than shouting ever could. She powered her phone off and leaned back. This was the moment she had planned for. The legal response arrived within hours. Cease and desist notices, threats framed as reminders, the NDA invoked with precision. But contracts rely on imbalance, and that imbalance had collapsed publicly. Her evidence spread faster than injunctions. The board delayed its vote indefinitely. Control was slipping through his fingers. I felt the fear then, not of him, of the unknown. Freedom is loud after long silence. There was no mansion to return to, no script waiting, just consequences unfolding at full speed. I reminded myself why I chose this, why survival mattered more than comfort, and why silence had almost destroyed me. He released a statement the next morning, carefully worded, emotionless. It acknowledged private misunderstandings, denied intent, promised review. The public did not accept it. Patterns surfaced. Former associates spoke cautiously. The image cracked beyond repair. Damage control became impossible to stage. The ex-wife reached out again. This time, there was no warning in her voice, only relief. "You did what none of us could," she said. The sentence landed heavier than praise. Silence had protected him for years. Noise finally disrupted the system. That mattered more than revenge. He lost the vote 2 days later. Not publicly announced, quietly recorded. Influence evaporates when trust erodes. Investors withdrew support without explanation. Advisors resigned strategically. Power isolates before it collapses. She watched the updates without satisfaction. This wasn't triumph. It was consequence. I packed what little I owned myself. No staff, no supervision. And just me and the life I was reclaiming. The contract payout transferred automatically. Money felt strangely irrelevant now. What mattered was choice. I left without ceremony. Some exits don't need witnesses. They need resolve. The fallout continued without her involvement. She stopped monitoring headlines after the third day. Information had done its work. Now distance mattered. She relocated quietly, choosing anonymity over statements. A smaller city, A rented apartment with thin walls and honest sounds. For the first time in a year, nothing watched her sleep. That absence felt unfamiliar and necessary. He sent one final message. Not legal, not strategic, just words. He acknowledged crossing lines he once enforced. He asked for a conversation, not forgiveness, not reconciliation, understanding. Anira, she read it once and archived it without reply. Some explanations arrived too late to matter. I felt the weight lift gradually, not all at once. Freedom doesn't announce itself. It settles in quietly when fear leaves the room. I began sleeping through the night. I stopped checking doors instinctively. My voice returned to its natural volume. These were small victories. They counted the most. Her mother's health stabilized soon after. The treatment she needed finally became accessible. Hospital visits no longer carried panic, just patience. Sitting beside the bed holding a familiar hand felt grounding. This was the reason she signed the contract. Not ambition, not escape. Protection. The cost had been high, but the outcome was real. The payout funded more than recovery. It bought independence. She enrolled in courses she once postponed, built a routine without surveillance. Work became something she chose, not endured. For the first time, her future did not require negotiation. She was no longer positioned relative to someone else's power. She stood alone. That steadiness was earned. He faded from relevance slowly. Scandals moved on. New names replaced his. Power does not vanish dramatically. It erodes when attention leaves. She did not track his decline. Detachment was part of healing. Knowing she was no longer affected by his position confirmed the separation. Influence only works when it's acknowledged. I thought about love differently after that year. Not as rescue, not as endurance, but as mutual choice without leverage. What I lived through wasn't romance, it was survival under terms. I promised myself I would never confuse the two again. Peace became the new requirement. Anything else was optional. The mansion still appeared in dreams sometimes. Not as a threat, as a chapter closed. Memory loses power when it's acknowledged without fear. She didn't regret leaving. She didn't regret staying long enough to finish it properly. Some wars are won by walking away at the right moment. Timing had saved her. She never answered his final call. Not out of anger, out of completion. The contract had ended. So had the hold. Her life no longer required explanation or defense. The enemy had been survived. And survival, once reclaimed, did not need witnesses. Time did not rush her healing. It moved at a human pace. Days unfolded without urgency or spectacle. She built mornings around quiet habits. Hot coffee brewed slowly. Windows stayed open. No assistants waited outside doors. No schedules dictated her movement. Freedom revealed itself through ordinary choices. She returned to work on her own terms, not as someone's wife, not as a public symbol, as herself. Colleagues knew nothing of her past unless she chose to share it. Her name stood alone on emails and documents. No shadow followed her into rooms. Authority felt different when it wasn't borrowed. She carried herself without explanation. I noticed how my body responded to safety. Shoulders no longer tense at sudden sounds. My breath stayed steady in crowded spaces. I stopped rehearsing conversations in advance. Control had once been imposed on me. Now it lived inside me quietly. That shift felt permanent, not fragile. Earned. One evening, she attended a small gathering. No press, no curated guest list, just people speaking without agendas. When asked about her past year, she answered simply, "It was complicated." No one pushed. She wasn't required to perform vulnerability. Boundaries held without defense. That was new. The contract resurfaced once in her thoughts. Not as trauma, as proof. She had read every line now without anger. It represented a version of herself who survived without knowing she could win. She archived the document permanently, not to remember him, to remember herself. That distinction mattered. He appeared once more in the news, briefly, a footnote in a larger story. She read the headline without reaction. The absence of emotion confirmed closure. Power fades fastest when it stops shaping lives. His no longer shaped hers. And the chapter had lost relevance. She closed the page without ceremony. I understood then that revenge had never been my goal. Freedom was. Voice was. Choice was, what I took back could not be quantified or transferred. It stayed with me in silence. That made it untouchable. No one could negotiate it away again. Not ever. She rebuilt relationships slowly. Trust returned through consistency, not declarations. People learned her rhythms without control. Affection existed without obligation. Love, when it came, arrived gently. No contracts, no leverage. Just presence offered freely. That simplicity redefined everything she had survived. The year inside the enemy's world no longer defined her. It informed her. She carried its lessons without carrying its weight. When asked who she was now, well, she answered without hesitation. Someone who learned her worth under pressure. Someone who walked away whole. The story did not end in escape. It ended in ownership. The contract year faded into memory without ceremony. Not erased, integrated. She no longer measured time by what it cost her. She measured it by what it gave back. Days were chosen, not endured. Nights were quiet without vigilance. Her life no longer needed an audience to validate it. That freedom felt deliberate and final. People sometimes asked how she survived it. She never dramatized the answer. I stayed aware, she said. Awareness had been the difference between erasure and escape, between being managed and choosing. The story was not about a billionaire. It was about a woman refusing to disappear. That distinction mattered more than any headline. I no longer flinched at authority. Titles didn't impress me. Money didn't silence me. I had seen power up close and learned its limits. Most of it depended on fear, and fear no longer lived in my body. That absence was permanent. I carried it like armor no one could see. Her phone stayed quiet most days. No urgent calls, no crisis-driven demands. When it rang, it was because someone wanted her, not needed her silence, not purchased her presence. Choice reshaped every connection. That simplicity kept her grounded. She returned once to the edge of the city where the mansion stood, not to confront it, not to reclaim anything, only to confirm distance. The building looked smaller than memory allowed. Power shrinks when you step outside its reach. She turned away without emotion. Closure didn't require confrontation. I forgave myself fully there, for signing, for staying, for believing survival required submission. Forgiveness wasn't weakness, it was release. The past no longer argued with me. It listened quietly as I moved forward. That peace was earned. Her future unfolded without spectacle. Plans grew organically. Work expanded steadily. Relationships remained honest. She protected her boundaries without apology. Nothing in her life now depended on silence. She spoke when it mattered. She rested when it didn't. Balance replaced vigilance. The enemy never returned. Not in reality, not in power. He existed only as a chapter she had completed. Stories end when they stop controlling the narrator. She had reclaimed authorship. Her life no longer reacted. It responded. That distinction defined freedom. I lived with the enemy for 12 months. I walked away free, not because I was saved, but because I learned my worth under pressure. If this story stayed with you, stay with me. Like the video. Comment your thoughts, subscribe, and remain part of this family. Storyverse Vault is home because of you, and I'll keep telling these stories for us.